Rosh Chodesh. Okay. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Lamed. We left off yesterday learning the three of Rav, Shmuel, and Rabbi Yochanan regarding a mixture of chametz. We're going to repeat their shitas in a moment. We're going to recap this sugya by Rava paskening like Rav, and we're going to have a huge machloikis, Rashi Tosfos, in understanding, Rashi Rabbeinu Tam, in understanding exactly what is Rava saying, because we have a rule that we pasken like Rava. Rava and Abaye, we pasken like Rava. And this is going to be a very halacha l'maisa dika machloikis as to understanding exactly what Rava means when Rav paskins like Rav. The whole daf is going to be a daf of kashrus. So we're going to have the topic of what do you do with earthenware pots that were used for cooking chametz before Pesach. There's a machloikis between Rav and Shmuel. We're going to have shitas Rav that nois and tamlev gam is aser. We're going to learn about the obligation of keeping breads pareve, because if you're going to make breads either milchiks or fleishiks, then a person not knowing that might eat that bread with the opposite. So if there's a fleishik bread, he might eat it with milchiks. If there's a milchik bread, he might eat it with fleishiks. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to this rule, and that would be that if the bread that is milchiks or fleishiks looks very different, people know, this is the milchik bread, that's the fleishik bread, then there is no such problem. We're speaking about a bread that looks like a normal piece of bread. We're going to be learning about knives, what needs to be done to knives that absorb the tam of chametz from before Pesach. We're going to learn the rule of Kabbalah Kachpoltai. We're going to learn a Tosfos that differentiates between Hetera Bala or Yisuda Bala, Kavush Kamavushal. We're going to learn that kalim that are used for very sharp items are like kavush, even though the item was not in there for 24 hours, and many, many other halachas that pertain to kashrus. And maybe we'll begin with the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Amud Beis, but let's start Chevra on top of Daf Lamed. Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, all the way on the top.
Sorry, Dan, can you mute yourself, please? Thanks.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We started to learn, and let's just quickly recap that. If chametz was mixed into a non-chametz, Tarayvus chametz, prohibition, was mixed into that which is permitted. So we learned the shita of Rav and Shmuel that paskin like the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda that holds that min b'minoi is never bottle. Rav went further and he made the following gezerah. He says that if chametz got mixed into non-chametz on Pesach, right, chametz bismanoi, not only is min b'minoi, in other words, no matter how little chametz fell into this larger food, min b'minoi, the chametz is going to aser everything. But even when it's min b'she'enoi minoi, normally min b'she'enoi minoi, if it's no longer nice and tam, in other words, if the ratio of the permitted against the prohibited is 60 against 1 or more than 60 against 1, it's mevatel the iser. But because, as we explained, of the two unique stringencies that we find by chametz, number one, there's a chiyuv kares, that's chametz bismanoi, on the 7 days, 8 days of Pesach. And because of the fact that the loy bedilamine, Rav says that even min d'she'ena minoi on Pesach, chametz is asers b'mashahu, it's never going to be batel. Shmuel doesn't subscribe to such a gezerah. And then we learned the shita of Rabbi Yochanan that holds that Bechlal, he holds min b'minoi, actually midairaisa is batel b'roiv. But midrabanan, all you need is a nice and tam. And shita of Rabbi Yochanan is that if there was chametz bismanoi, then it's only going to aser the mixture like any other isurim. If the ratio is less than 60 to 1, the moment it's no longer nice and tam, it's going to become batel. And then we learned Rabbi Yochanan had even a bigger chiddush, that chametz after that chametz that sha'avar olav Pesach after Pesach la'achar zmanoi, that's taka aser. But if that got mixed into a mixture, based on Rabbi Yochanan's paskening like Rab Shimon, that midoiraisa chametz sha'avar olav Pesach b'chlal is not aser. Eloma, it's only a rabbinic issue. Now, a rabbinic issue is an issue. We'll explain today why that won't be an issue when there is a mixture. If there is a mixture, even if it's nice and tam. In other words, even if there isn't 60 against 1. Nevertheless, as long as, we will learn like the Ran, as long as it's roiv mutter against the minority of chametz she'avar olav Pesach, it will become nullified and the mixture will be permitted. That is the 3 shittas that we learned yesterday. And now let's start. Amar Rava, hilchasa, chametz bismanoi. So again, if chametz during Pesach gets mixed into other foods, bein deminoi, bein be'ishaloi beminoi, Rava is saying aser b'mashuhu kirav. Sounds like he's paskening like Rav. Now this is important because Rav, as we mentioned yesterday, paskins, Rav and Shmuel, but let's focus on Rav over here. He paskins like Rebbe Yehuda that holds that by all mixtures, not only by chametz, by all isurim, min b'minoi is never bottle. Aser is b'mashuhu. Shaloi b'zmanoi, if chametz after Pesach got mixed into other foods, bein b'minoi, bein shaloi b'minoi, it's always going to be mutter like Rab Shimon. Wow. Now again, we're going to have to explain, even though Rab Shimon Taka holds that chametz la'achar zmanoi is not asur at all midoi raisa, but there's an isur derabanan. We are from a Yidden. A isur derabanan is a isur derabanan. So at least give the noise and tam. What he's saying here is mutter means that even if it didn't fall into 60 times against it, as long as roiv is a heter, it's always going to become nullified. The question will be why. We'll explain that in a moment. But before we go on, let's read Rashi. It's very important. Top of the Amid. Amar Rava Hilchas Echuli. Shma Mina says Rashi that the Pasak Rava Hilchas the Holy Surin Shabbat Torah b'minam b'mashu. Because the fact that Rav is saying, I paskin like Rav, we learned yesterday Rav's din of min b'minoi is not unique for chametz. The only chiddush of Rav is that on chametz b'Pesach we make a gzeira min shaloi b'minoi otu min b'minoi. But min b'minoi that it's not bottom is a general rule. And v'loishaliman ben chametz l'shari surah ela b'hamilsa the gozar shaloi b'minon otu minon. And therefore Rashi is saying, so shmainan mina from this sack of Rava, and we take Rava very seriously. We paskin like Rava. That chaylev that falls into a pot of meat. Now chaylev and meat is called minam. It's part of the animal. And v'chein halacha. And we don't say, if a little bit of chaylev fell into a pot of kosher meat and there was 60 times against it. In other words, the chaylev was theoretically not nois and tam. There is no bittul. So says Rashi. If it falls into shishim, it's batal. That is only bishaloi b'minimal. Look inside the Tosfos. Now we're not going to go from the beginning, but we're going to go for, probably 15 lines into it. In the beginning of the line, v'Rabbeinu tam omar, v'Rabbeinu tam oimer, that Rashi didn't understand correct pshat over here. When Rava paskent like Rav, he was only speaking about Pesach. The Chol Elu and other things that Tosfos brought out above, Einam Rayas, the Ein Halacha, not like Rabbi Yehuda, and not like Rav. In other words, Tosfos is clearly saying that that min b'minoi is also going to be nullified b'nois and tam. It's very important machlekes and halacha for those of us who learn smicha. Min b'minoi, if the ratio was 60 against 1, will also be nullified. The one exception is chametz on Pesach. And we paskin like the Rabbeinu Tam. In other words, when Rav is saying we paskin like Rav, he only means by Pesach. Not mamish like Rav. Rav, the emes holds by all Yisurim Shabbat Torah. Rav says like Rabbi Yehuda. We don't paskin like the Rabbi Yehuda that we mentioned yesterday. We hold that when a davar asur falls into a davar amuter, take out chametz, aside of chametz and Pesach, there's bittul 60-1. Rashi doesn't learn that way. We're going to learn Gemara Rashi. Rashi understands that the Rav is paskening completely like Rav. Min b'mina is never batal. Also not on chametz on Pesach. The chiddush is, the chumrah of Pesach is that even min b'sheloi minoi, b'she'ena minoi. So if chametz on Pesach falls into, I don't know, the bread, right, falls into a pot of soup, has nothing to do one with the other. Even if there's a ratio of 60 against it, even if there's 1,000 against it, we know this. Chametz b'Pesach has asher b'mashu. That's a gzeira, sheloi b'minoi, atu b'minoi. But that is only if chametz is on Pesach. But if, again, what Rav is saying, but if it falls after Pesach, if chametz she'avar all of Pesach falls into a mixture, you don't even need to have 60. You don't say that if it's nice and tamar asers, it doesn't aser. No, you need to have a bittul beroiv. That's what the Ran says. We're going to go with that. But you don't even need 60. Why don't you need 60? Because we paskin like Rab Shimon. But how does that help you guys? How does that help you? Wasn't Rav? I know we learned the 3 shitas beginning on that Chav Ches Amud Aleph from the bottom, but the Gemara asks, "Umi Amar Rava Hache," that since we paskin like Rab Shimon, I don't have a problem with the mixture. So what if we paskin like Rab Shimon? V'ha Amar Rava. Rava said right after we went through all the 3 shitas of the Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda, Rab Shimon, Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So he had in Daf Chav Tes, who is the Mishnah going according? That the Mishnah is going according to Rab Shimon. The Mishnah in Daf Chav Ches says that chametz la'achar zmana is asur bahana. It's asur. So he explained, no, it's taka not midoraisa. It's taka following Rab Shimon, but even according to Rab Shimon, kanasa, kanis, hoil, va'olav, olav, aval yirah, aval yamatzah. So chametz la'achar zmana is asur midrabanan. Okay, fine. So it should be batal when it's no longer nois and tam. That would be great, but that's not what the Rav is saying. Rav is saying that it's batal even only beroiv. Why? So here we have another chiddush. L'shitas Rab Shimon. Answers the Gemara. Hanamile. When does Rab Shimon say that chametz she'avar all of Pesach is asur b'hana midrabanan? That's be'enei. That's when the chametz is be'en. Aval al yidei ta'roives. But if it was mixed, even if there is no 60 against it, no, you have to have roiv against it. If it's mixed, there was never gzeira the rabbanan. Aladei taroives loy, and va'ozda rava l'taimei. That what says Rashi 9 lines from the top of the Amid, that Rava here is saying that halacha follows Rab Shimon. L'taimei, I'm reading inside the Rashi, the Amar Nami Ba'alma, Chametz shel Nachri, she'avar olav HaPesach, muter av ba'achila. And that can only go according to Rab Shimon. In other words, Rava is going l'tamei, that what? That we paskin like Rab Shimon, and not like Rabbi Yehuda. Chametz she'avar olav HaPesach is not asur midoraisa, it's only asur midrabanan. And when is it asur midrabanan? Only as a knas for those who violated bal yirah bal yamatzah, which automatically means that chametz that belonged to a goy over Pesach is allowed to be consumed after Pesach right away, which is, by the way we paskin, right? Chametz that belonged to a non-Jew, we allowed to buy it right after Pesach. The Amar Rava says that Kiavin and Rav Nachman, when I was in the house of Rav Nachman, ki have enough kishiva yom in the Pesach. After the 7 days of Pesach just ended, people want to buy chametz. So Amar Lon, Rava told us, Puku, you can go out, Uzevino, you can buy chamira chametz, the b'nei chela from the soldiers, from the goyish soldiers. Even though we know that chametz was already baked on Pesach. Why? Because it belonged to a non-Jew. Is araya that we paskin like Rabbi Shimon. Had we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, that would have been completely awesome. Now there is a whole topic over here. Hold on, I get it that we paskin like Rabbi Shimon and chametz she'avar all of Pesach by a goy. Therefore, it's not even awesome with the rabbanon. But how can you buy bread from goyish soldiers? That's the whole sugi in avodah zarah da flamed hay, right? So it's pasakum and it's paspalted, and there's a whole topic here about that. That's one of the people that are lenient, as we learned over there. But again, not pas akum that was baked by an individual, but it was baked by a baker. It was mass produced. And there isn't any other chametz available, which is exactly what happens right after Pesach. This is way before we began to use, like 300 years back to now, mechiras chametz. There wasn't such a thing yet. In other words, the only chametz that you had was not chametz that you baked before and then you sold it to a guy and you got it back. No. It was chametz taka that belonged to goyim. So then he bought it from the soldiers. Other explain no, that the soldiers didn't have fully baked bread. They had dough. And we baked it. Oh, as long as there's a Jew involved in the baking of the bread, even in the most minimal way, it's no longer in the issue of pas akum. Okay. Now we're going to continue to learn. The whole daf is for people who learn smicha. Pesachim lamed is a essential daf. Just starting with the smachlokas Rashi Rabbeinu Tam, and we paskin like the Rabbeinu Tam, whether min b'minoi is batal or not. Pashit. Rabbeinu Tam says min b'minoi we paskin like Rava, but min b'minoi is only a problem on Pesach, as we all know. Chametz b'Pesach is also b'mashu. By other Yisuri the Torah, we paskin like the Rabbeinu Tam, not like Rashi. If chaylev, right, falls into kosher meat, it will become batal when there's a ratio 60-1. Kishitas chachamim, and not like the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda and Menachas Chavbeis. Okay, let's go weiter. Next, the two dots. The next sugya has everything to do with the fact that earthenware utensils that absorb, like any other utensil, like metal utensils, like wooden utensils, metal and wood, even though they absorb the tam of an isur, but you are able to purge them with the system of kabbalah kachpalton. If they absorbed that taste because there was water, hot water involved, that hagala, hot water, will purge it. If it absorbed it when it was used directly over fire without the addition of water, so then libun, right, burning it will purge the tam of the isur out. But earthenware utensils, even though when you put them in boiling water or if you apply fire to them, some of the taste will go out, but not all of it. Some of it will remain. So you got yourselves a problem now with the earthenware utensil. The beliyos will never be completely expelled. Now let's link that with our sugya. What did we just learn right now? That chametz she'avar al Pesach is asur. Even if we're going to paskin like Rab Shimon, right? But it's asur for a yid. It's a knas. So if I'm going to have a pot that has the beliyos of chametz in it, what do I do with this pot right now? What do I do with this earthenware utensil?
I thought we said that taruvas is not a problem according to Reb Shimon.
Are you allowed to make taruvas? Are you allowed to be mavatal iser? So let's read it inside right now. So Amar Rav, kidei rois bePesach, that earthenware utensils, when it comes to Pesach, they must be broken. Why must they be broken? They must be broken because you will not be allowed to use them lechatchila after Pesach. Let's read inside the Rashi. Rashi 17 lines from the top of the Amid. Amar Rav Kedeiros b'Pesach yishavru. Rav Latame, couple of steps over here. Number one, the Amar that Rav holds chametz af la'achar zmanoi asur ba'ano ki Rav Yehuda. Remember, Rav paskin like Rav only. I'm sorry, Danny, that's the answer to your question. Rav paskint like Rav on Zmanoi. Rav paskint like Rab Shimon la'achar Zmanoi. But yesterday we learned that Rav paskins like Rab Yehuda. Rav holds that even la'achar Zmanoi, we don't paskin like Rab Shimon. That's step number one. In other words, chametz la'achar Zmanoi is asur b'no ki Rab Yehuda. Number one. Number two, let's go further. Rav paskins that min b'minoi is never batal. Never batal. Which means that if you're going to use the pot for something that is b'minoi of the chametz that's balua in it, it will never be batal. It will never be batal. The islay b'mashuhu. Guys, b'mashuhu again, b'minoi. And another principle of Rav, because Rav holds noisam tam levgam asur, because people hold on. The beliyas, by default, if it happened before Pesach, then after Pesach, it's more than 24 hours. And the tam that's balua, we paskin, becomes pogum, becomes bad, becomes putrid after 24 hours. Here, Rav doesn't subscribe to that. Rav holds noisam tam levgam is asur. And therefore, how can you use the pot? There's a tam of isur. If you're going to use it min b'minoi, it will never be batal. Now, true, Rav Taka said that la'achar zmanei we don't make exeda. So what? But if you're going to have a pot, what? First of all, and also, are you only going to use the pot for shaloi b'minoi of the chametz? Let's say you use the pot to bake lakshan, to cook lakshan. So that means that if you're going to cook lakshan after Pesach, that's min b'minoi. And according to Rav, it's never going to become batal. So there you got yourself a problem. There's nothing you can do with this pot.
So can you just clarify the nice and tam issue doesn't help us at all, according to Rav?
No, because Rav paskins that min b'minoi is never batal. Kirab Yehuda. And
even if it's putrid.
No, Rav also doesn't hold that it becomes putrid. Rav holds noisen tam lev, yeah, even if it's putrid. There's no heter of pigam. Just like by the end, there was no 24 hours. The meat already was shechted 24 hours. The end, there's no noisen tam lev gam. If the meat is there, the meat is there. There is no concept that since the tam is already old, it's poigam. Rav doesn't subscribe to that. So therefore, Rav is very machmir. Now, halacha l'maisa, where do we have such a chumrah of breaking an earthenware utensil? Just to know, only in the Beis Hamikdash. In the Beis Hamikdash, we have an issue of noiser, right? Everything has an end date. Even shlamim, 2 days and 1 night. So if someone is going to cook the psara shlamim in a earthenware utensil, it's going to become bolua betam noiser and chanami. In the Beis Hamikdash, all of the earthenware, if they use klei cheres, they broke it the whole time. All of the shards that we find now in the excavations, that has to do because they were choishes that it was boileya, the time of kachin. And an earthenware utensil can never be fully purged. Now Rashi, let's continue. Rashi says, we don't paskin like this, Rav, mitrei tama, for 2 reasons. Number 1, because the oiker Rabbi hilcha said that taroivis la'achar zmani mutikir Rab Shimon. Number 1, we paskin like Rava always. Again, aside of the Al-Kagam, like Abaya, Rava said, La'achar zmanai, we paskin like Rab Shimon. And what did we say, Rab Shimon? Even we're going to go with the Ran, that you have to have a bittul beroiv. By default, you always have a bittul beroiv. When you cook something in a pot, the tam that's balua will be in the minority of the food that's in the pot, always. In most cases, it's going to be batal b'shishim, but you don't even need that. So it's not a problem. The high pachus mitareva, so it's even less than a mixture because it's only called tam. Furthermore, it says Rashi the Kaimelon Loisen Tam Lav Gam is mutter. And v'zem mishu avral meya Pesach automatically hufak tamei b'doif ne'akli. But anyways, Rashi is saying that we don't paskin like Rav, but it's coming back. Rav l'shita soy the valdik. We paskin like Rabbi. Rav says like Rabbi Yehuda, not like Rab Shimon. Min demino is never bottle. Loisen Tam Lav Gam is usher. You got yourself a problem. I frag the Gemara v'amai lashinu. Why didn't you keep the pots until after Pesach and only use it shaloi b'minam? Because even according to Rav, min the she'enoi minoi is bottle b'noisen tam. Again, the tam of the isur, the tam in the walls of the pots will become nullified if you fill the pot up with food. There'll be 60 against it. So why didn't you use it at least? Just remember, use the pot for shaloi b'minoi. So the Gemara says no. Gzeira dilma asalam ebat b'minoi. You might forget. Can't have a pot for which you can't use it for certain things. And therefore, you got to break it. However,
is it, Rabbi, is it not the first time not using it? You got to use it only the first time for something else, and then you can use it back for loction, or no?
No, if you say min demino is never bottle, it means also b'mashahu. So when you use it for something else, then you'll have the taste of 2 things in the walls of the pot. But again, if you were going now with Rav, min demino is also b'mashahu. I don't care how little, there's always going to be tam chametz. And whenever you cook the same minoi, it will never be bottle. And again, noisim tam lav gam is us. Shmuel holds lo yishavru with the fabrech garnished. Ela mashi hi l'achar zmanoi. Wait until after Pesach. And I mean, obviously, you got to make sure you don't accidentally use it during Pesach, but that's not negated our sugya. And v'avid bohu, and then you can use it sai b'minoi, sai shaloi b'minoi. Why is that? Because we learned yesterday that Shmuel paskins like Rab Shimon. What does Rab Shimon hold? La'achar zmanoi, la'achar zmanoi. There's no iser doiraisa. There's an iser derabanan. So we learned today that even according to Rab Shimon, there is no iser derabanan when it's alidei taroivis. By default, tam balua is even less than a taroivis. It's not a be'en. It's just a tam. So hold it till after Pesach, and then you can cook which is beautiful.
Question, Rabbi.
It's not bottle, even though Shmuel also holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Doesn't matter. Because after Pesach, that Isur, there's no Isur. The Isur that Rabbanan was lechatchila never on a mixture. Yes, Rabbi Chaim.
But being that back then they weren't selling their chametz on Pesach, so then when he's owning a pot that has balua chametz inside of it, he's technically owning chametz on Pesach, no?
No.
I mean, how does he put it on the side?
No, that's not. We don't say that bal yirah bal yemotza on the tam that's balua. Okay. Now, v'azar Shmuel l'taimei, that Shmuel holds that such pots need not be broken. The Amar Shmuel lahanu demizab mekande. There were pot sellers, Now, guys, there was common that people used to break their pots. And therefore, there was a need for buying new pots right after Pesach. So the pot merchants, Keminik merchants, they were taking advantage. There was a very high demand. So they wanted to spike their prices. So Shmuel would tell them that Ashvu Zivine Akandiche, keep your prices fair. And if you're going to charge more than the real value, I'm going to darshan that we paskin like Rab Shimon, and Bachlal, no one has to break their pots before Pesach. It was most people's utensils in the kitchen was earthenware. So the Gemara doesn't understand what Shmuel is saying. What, if Shmuel paskins, which he does like Rab Shimon, who cares if they don't spike their prices of the pots, if it's a fair value? According to Shmuel, no one needed to break their pots to begin with. Let Shmuel darshan to people that don't break your pots. Put it aside and then start using it again after Pesach. Let him darshan regardless, because Shmuel holds like Rab Shimon, Sfiralei. And as we learned, there isn't even an Isur Derabanan alidei taroivis for chametz la'achar zmanoi. So the Gemara says now, Shmuel made that threat in the location of Rav. Now, ba'asrei the Rav, they paskin like Rav. Rav paskins like Rabbi Yehuda, that chametz la'achar zmanoi is also midoiraisa. And as we mentioned, Eloma, Shmuel felt that if they're going to start taking advantage of Rav's chumras, all of the chumras, Rav held you have to break all your pots. Shmuel says, you know what, I'll make an exception. I'm going to tell the oilam they can rely on me. And then they won't have to buy any pots at all. Right. The next sugya about the tanur is also based on this concept that beliyos in a klei cheres are unable to be fully purged. Now, hahu tanura, there was an oven. The tochu bei tichaya that was smeared with what's tichaya. So Rashi says it was a grease. We're not speaking about isur. We're speaking about a belia of heter. In other words, they had certain types of fats, not chelav, but fats is fleishiks from an animal that they would smear in the inside of the oven. Rashi says, in order for them, when they place the bread, it should not stick on and burn to the walls of the oven. So what's the problem? The problem here is that the bread now absorbed fleishiks. It's a fleishik, a bread. So says the Gemara, back in the Gemara, Asara Rava bar Ahiloi lemichle lerifta. That Rava bar Ahiloi says you may not eat this bread. Why may you not eat this bread? Well, avada, you can't eat it with milchiks because it's fleishiks. But he says you can't even eat it afilo b'milcha. You can't even eat it just with salt. Why? Because if you will be allowed to eat this bread, you might accidentally eat it with milchiks. Then the next word, la'olam, means, this is important, not only is the first bread prohibited, the bread that you put on that fat, but even the next bread and the next bread, even though the oven was fired up, it cooled down, all of the breads that will be baked in the oven going further will always be fleishiks. And none of them, therefore, can be eaten. One second. Why doesn't the oven kasher itself every time you fire it up? That's a raya again, that earthenware utensil, even when you apply the same amount of heat, some of the tam might have gone out, but not all of it. So it always remains fleishiks. And the ishtik, and who cares if a bread is fleishiks? Because Dilma Asay, lemichle bekutcha, that's Kavin's famous food. Kutach was that Babylonian rotten milk dip, milchiks, and people loved it over there in Babel. And this guy might use this bread. By the way, we paskin this way. We have to be very careful. It goes both ways, not to make breads, not milchiks nor fleishiks. Now, if a person has a unique characteristic that they put on the bread when it's milchiks, that's not a problem. If it's evident that it's a milchik bread, or if it's evident that it's a fleishik bread, but a bread, the way our breads look like, then if it looks like a pot of a bread, one is not allowed to make a bread either this or that, milchiks or fleishiks. And if you made it, you can't eat it at all. That's what we're probably, you can't even eat it with salt.
Wait, Rabbi.
Yes.
Just out of interest, I heard that in Israel, all cheese burekas have to be in a triangle shape. That way you know that it's a milchik bureka as opposed to a potato one.
Very good. Oh, Meisvei, Frekti, about Stezana Braisa. Hey, Loshanessa Isa Bachalov, you can't knead milk into a dough. Now, this is not the oven, this is in the dough. And the imlash, in other words, here you're making a milchike bread. Same thing. Because you might eat it with you want to eat it by itself? No. You might sin. In other words, this is milchik, you might eat it with milk. Continues the Baraisa kayoitza boy. Not only the negay of the bread itself, the flamed on the base. Here we are learning what we learned above. Ein toshin esatanur ba'aliyah. You may not grease the oil with the fatty tail. Guys, it's good to know. Chalev is not the tail, right? We learned that many times already. Okay, it's not about the tam of isur. It's simply about fleishiks. Because the same problem. The imtosh, kol hapas kol asura. The bread is asur. Achiyasik esatanur. Until you reheat the oven. In other words, when it's not the way we learned above lo oilam. Here, when you reheat the oven, the fire that you put in the oven will purge the tam of the fleishik. So we got a contradiction. In other words, the concept of you have to leave bread part of it. There's no contradiction here. But Frek the Gemara at the end of the second line, the Bryce is basically saying in between the lines that Mia Shari. So l'chayda to Yufta, the Rava bar Ahiloi, to Yufta, who said, like we touched the words lo'olam. Lo'olam means that even the subsequent breads may not be eaten. So the Gemara says no. Okay, finished. So we're to Yufta him. But we're not done yet. So says the Gemara, now that we established that he's wrong, now that we have a brisa that tells us that we could kasher even earthenware utensils, so why did Rav say, as we learned in Amud Aleph, that kededas b'Pesach yishavru, as we learned with all the chumras from Rav, keep all the chumras. Min b'mina is never bottle. Chametz after Pesach, Rabbi Yehuda's aser midoraisa. We hold the Mulation Tam of Gam is aser. Keep all of that. So what? Kasher the pot, kasher the earthenware pot. And you said that the Braisa to Yuftad Rabbi bar Ahiloi. So Amalei, so responds Ravashi to Ravina. No. Over here, the Braisa, Rav understood that the Braisa that says that if you reheat the oven, then you could break bread, that Braisa was Tanach shel Mateches. Yeah, of course, Mateches, you can believe on. You have an oven, do libun chamur. That's the way we kasher metal ovens. In other words, according to Rav, Rava bar Eloi was not to yuftad at all. And here, Rav...
Well, if it's fleish, it's not even libun gomer, then we're call on fleish.
It doesn't matter. I can't take of the word gomer. In other words, when you speak about metal, it could be purged. And over here, meaning Rav, and Rav, we learned in Amud Aleph says, break your pots. He was not speaking about metal pots. Metal pots where Shlomo HaMelech had metal pots. Wealthy people like us. The simple people, they had earthenware utensils. Number one, you say, no, even this is Gavaldik. Yeah, you're right. A earthenware keli sometimes could be kasher. And that's why, Taka, we refuted Rabbi bar Eloi. Let's remember, where exactly do you put the fire? Oven, pot. In the oven, you put the fire in the inside. By a pot, you put the fire under it, but in the outside. So the heat of the fire dissipates when it's not enclosed. So now we go into this concept of libun chamur or libun kad. Along with, there's a lesser amount of heat. Let's read it inside. The oven that the Braisa is speaking about, the Braisa says that you could kasher an oven, a earthenware oven. That's because he's sikon nibifnim. That's because the heat is concentrated inside of it. So it burns out fully the tam of the Aliyah of the shuman that you smeared in it. There's nothing left. And Rav, v'zen, he's sikon nibachutz. A pot, where do you put the fire in the pot? You put the fire underneath it. The fire is outside. It's not contained. The heat dissipates. Still a kashanav. Why did Rav say to break the pots? Rav should have said, Chevre, when it comes to after Pesach, take fire and put it in the pot. If he holds you can kasher earthenware by putting fire within it, so v'chitema hachi nami la'eved le'asaka mibafnim. So explains the Gemara why Rav held that's not a solution, because people will not listen. You know why? Because the type of pots that was used in the time of Rav were relatively thinner, flimsier, weaker. If you were to put fire in it, in many cases, it would crack the pot, so people wouldn't do it. They wouldn't know a difference inside, outside. They would say, I'm not going to put it in the inside. It's going to ruin the pot. I'll make a leaven from the outside, and that won't work. Because choyis alei, a person will have rachmanis on his keli, bishum depaka, because it might crack open, it might split open. So they won't do it properly. Based on this, it's now that we're saying that even Rav is moida, that you are able to kasher the earthenware utensil if the fire is put on the inside. And really, he can say that. He only doesn't say it on the pots that people use, because there they were flimsy. There was a certain type of tile ring in which people bake bread. You can Google, you can see different types of klicheres forms that people put bread inside of it. They were made out of very strong material. If that was smeared with shumen, with Aliyah, Rab will hold you can kasher it. Even Rab, you can kasher it. Therefore, Hilkach, Hai, Buchya, either Buchya or Kuvya, we're speaking about a certain type of tiled ring. It's an earthenware keli, whose insides were greased, used to bake bread. So he says that since he sikoi mebachutz hu v'aser, that if, in other words, when you use it normally, how do you use it normally? By having the fire underneath it. If you smear it with grease, it's going to be awesome because the fleishiks will remain in it. But if you, prior to using it for bread, you fill it up with coals, you put coals inside of it, and people are not afraid to put coals inside of this type of buchya or kuvya because it's very hard material. And now we're saying that you can kasher earthenware utensils when you put fire within it, then indeed shaper dummy, even according to Rav. And there's no chashash that people won't do that properly because it won't break. And by the way, I'm just trying to apply it more practical, that we also hold that when you put the earthenware utensil back in the kiln, then you take a kasher it. So this is a similar concept. Weiter. Next question. Hanas Akino, the Bach puts the letter Dalad instead of the base. De Pesach. If you want to use knives, we're speaking about knives, not on Pesach, that were used prior to Pesach for chametz. If you want to use it on Pesach, how do you kasher it? How do you kasher knives? Now, Omar Lei, so Ravashi says, Lididi chadator avdinan. I buy new ones. This is such a classical back and forth from a person who asks a Rav a Shaila, and the Rav is saying, just buy a new one. And the person says, you're the rabbi, maybe you're wealthy, you can buy a new one. I can't afford a new one. Tell me how to kasher it. It's not a solution. Amalei, so Ravina tells him, Tinachman, Mela, you master, the Eshelei, Kenst, Yacholst, has Geld. But for those, the loy Eshelei, my Kesev Minolan, I don't have money. If I don't have to, I don't want to buy a new one. So Ravashi says, you didn't understand what I said. Amalei, I didn't say that I buy new ones. Anon ke'ein chadato kamina. I will tell you how to kasher a knife in a way that it's just as good as brand new. Now, what do you need to do? So we're going to see in a moment what was the issue, why a knife. I'll speak it out in a moment. But he said was that katayu betina. First, I take the handle, the wooden handle, and I cover it in clay. And then uparzalayu, the metal part of the knife, I put into fire. That's a big chiddush. In other words, you would say, what do you need to do to kasher a metal utensil? I don't have gola. Ravashi is saying, no, you got to do libun, put it into fire. Now, you can't put the wood into the fire because the wood is going to burn in the fire. That's why he gave him that eitzah. Cover the handle with clay. Put it into fire. And then, and then, once the blade was libund, now take off the clay and put the handle into Hagala. This is based on the rule of Kibbaloi Kachpaltoi. So let me just go back over here that normally for something to be absorbed in the walls of a utensil, you have to have, as we'll learn from here until the Mishnah, one of the following three. Either heat. Now heat can be water, heat can be fire. The rule is Kibbaloi Kachpaltoi. If it absorbed it because there was water, boiling water, then boiling water is enough. Hagala is enough to kasher it. If it absorbed the tam of an isur because it was in fire, then you need to use fire. But you have exceptions, and where even without heat, there's going to be beliyas. First of all, if there's moisture that's soaking in a keli, we paskin for 24 hours or more. That's called kavush. Kavush kimavushal. Hagala is needed, but in other words, you have to do hagala. You don't need liban, but you have to do hagala. Then we have a concept that if something is very sharp, then because of the sharpness, it gets the tam gets absorbed in the keli that's holding it, even if there's no heat and even if it wasn't for 24 hours. And there's also a concept of duchka de sakina, that because of the people's using the knife with pressure, you're cutting it down hard into, let's say over here, into chametz, so that allows for the tam to go into the knife, even if there was no heat, even if there was no kavush kamavushal, even if there was no spices. But there's another issue, and that's really what the chiddush of Rav Ashi. The other issue is that there are some times that people would use a knife the way people use a spit. Even today, a knife is sharp. So let's say they would want to, for whatever reason, they would want to put bread in fire. So they would stick a knife into the bread, the knife would be in it, and then they would put the bread into the fire like a marshmallow. That was the issue. That was the worst case scenario. So Rav Ashi felt you have to be machmer, that since it could be, he began by wondering, since duchka de sakina, so it's boilea, the tam of chametz, so what do you need? So Rav Ashi says, well, yeah, by nuance. But then he meant to say, no, you have to do libun. Hagala is not enough. The question is, why isn't hagala enough? Because sometimes it's used in fire. But that's still a very big problem, because the main tashmish of a knife is not to use it as a spit. So therefore, the Gemara says that the hilchas, we don't need to put it in fire. That it's enough, side for the handle, and side for the blade itself, you have to kasher it, but it's enough to put it into hot water, into boiling water, as that water is in a klei rishon. That means the keli that is itself on the fire. Big machlokes rishonim, whether it has to be on the fire when you're doing hagala, which is the way we do it, or even if you took it off the fire, if it's still boiling and you only have like a second or two, unless it's a davar gush, you can kasher it as well. We'll leave that machlokes for another time. I want to learn a little bit of the top toises. The hilchas idi v'idi v'roischen. So Tosfos says over here, Tosfos was trying to understand that knives were used sometimes as a spit. And there's a rule, like we mentioned, of kabbalai kachpoltai. So how can we paskin against Rav Ashi? Rav Ashi makes sense. Sometimes knives are put into fire. So this is a very important rabbeinu. I'm just reading the last few words in the Tosfos. It says, Tosfos v'oid yesh lachalik bein heitera bala ubein isura bala. Notice if the fear is the knife was used in a treifa restaurant, then maybe not only was it used to cut treifa meat, but maybe sometimes a guy stuck the knife in the meat and put the meat in the fire, shish kebab. Then we would paskin like Rav Ashi. Even if that's not the main function of the knife, says the Rabbeinu Tam, it might have happened once with libun, with fire, kabbalah kachpaltai. If it absorbed through fire, you have to purge it through fire. Hagala will never be enough. But since over here we're speaking about chametz, and chametz before Pesach is not a davar ha'asur, so we are lenient. Here we learned the first leniency when it comes to chametz. We began the daf, according to Rav, right? That chametz is asur b'mashu. Chametz, and even though we paskin not the way Rashi says, the way Rabbeinu Tam says, still we know that chametz on Pesach is asur b'mashu. At least we're learning a leniency when it comes to kashering kelim before Pesach. Fakert, chametz is before Pesach is a davar hamuter. By the way, before Pesach chametz, not lifnei zmanoi misheva ulamaylo. Before Pesach chametz is also batel. It's hatera before Pesach. There's no issue. Chametz asur b'mashu is only when it became asur. Then it's asur b'mashu, and it's never going to become bottled. But coming back over here, that's a good place for us to know that is quoted a lot in the Noise Kelim and Shulchan Aruch, the difference between Hetera Bala and Isura Bala. Now, Rabbeinu Tam even adds, Rav Ashi knew that. Rav Ashi knew that al pi halacha there is a difference between Hetera Bala and Isura Bala. He knew that a knife, even if it was, that's the way we're learning, occasionally used in fire, a knife doesn't have to be libund. Rav Ashi was machmer. Rav Ashi is not paskening for the oilam. Ravina and Rav Ashi, they were the two great Amoraim that put together the Gemara. Ravina was, the Gemara says, a Talmud Chavir of Rav Ashi. So to your Talmud Chavir, you can say, yeah, be machmer, do libun. The handle is going to burn, cover it with clay, and then do agala to the handle. That's all the chumrah, but al pi ikar adin, the hilchas say, idi beroischen with kledish. Let's go weiter. Amar Afuna Breder Rabbi Yeshua. Similarly, a wooden mixing spoon. So a wooden mixing spoon was used to turn the lakshin in hot water. It's not used in fire. So therefore, based on the rule of Kabbalah Kachpaltai, so Magilei Beroischen Ubekledishin. Because Rafuna Bereder Rabbi Yeshua holds of the principle of Kabbalah Kachpaltai, right? The manner that it was absorbed, so in that same manner will it be expelled. You don't have to add anything to it. Says the Gemara Bo Minei, either Meimar, or we have in the Bach Mimereimar. Here we are speaking about glazed vessels. Now we're going to learn here. We're speaking about an earthenware ukeli, a clay cheres that was glazed with lead. Now lead, like metal, could be kashet. Earthenware cannot be kashet. This obviously doesn't apply to the system of glazing that we do nowadays. But in those days, the question was, how good was the glazing? In other words, the metal could be kashet. Earthenware, as we learned, can never be kashet, with the exception of maybe putting coals inside of it, which you can't do it in an average keli. It's going to break. People might not listen to it, so you can't kasher it. So, is there a way for you to be able to use it on Pesach? And here again, what about after Pesach? It has beliyos. Well, if we paskin like Rav, we got a problem, but we paskin like Shmuel. We don't have a problem. So the Gemara says there were three types of earthenware utensils. There were green ones, and the green earthenware utensils were more porous, so they absorbed more problematic. Because they're very absorbent. The issue will be if the keli itself, prior to glazing, was black or white. Those were the three types: green, black, and white. And they were thicker, they were less absorbent. And Pasha, the question is whether this metal coating properly stopped whatever was the chametz that was in there to go inside the keli. Now, another detail. Whenever there are cracks in the glazing, in the lead, so then the chametz goes through the cracks. My question is the shiur when it's smooth, so Amalei, to which he responded that it's boileya. How do I know that it is boileya and therefore problematic? Because chazina lahu, I see that midaise, it schwitzes. In other words, when you put water in these glazed kalim, water in the inside, the outside of the keli, he noticed some of the moisture traveled out. That means it went through the walls of the keli. Alma b'liye, and therefore isure. And he says the principle that a clay cheres can't be kashered because v'hatoira he'ida. This is psukim that we have in Vayikra, like I mentioned, regarding clay cheres that's used in the Beis Hamikdash for karbanos. And here the noisa, the meat, when it gets absorbed, also hetera bala, but then it becomes noisa. That it never loses its state of defectiveness. Unlike the Torah says explicitly, Rashi writes all the psukim by kliyates, by klimatros, that you can taviru ba'esh, umayrek v'shuta b'mayim. But none of that is written by a klecheres, not eish, not mayim, because it's never fully going to expel the tam that's beluam. Fragt die Gemara, yayin nesach. Yayin nesach doesn't mean yayin nesach, it means yayin stam. The darish mereimar, that money, the koiniya, that these types of glazed earthenware kalim, whether the earthenware part is black, whether it's white, whether it's green, they are allowed to be used, even if they were used previously for yayin stam. Upa, you're telling me that it absorbs. If it absorbs, then you got yourself a problem with the keli. Yayin nesach is only the rabbanan against yayin stam. And here we were speaking about chametz d'oraisa. That is not going to be the right answer because of the klal that called the takon rabbanan kein d'oraisa takon. Right? It's governed by the same rules. The Amalei, no, that's the difference. Hot and cold. That's Zeh Chametz Tashmishoy Alidei Chamin. So that's is when there's chamin, there's a problem. But yayin is not chamin. And therefore, no, it was not boileya, and therefore you have no problem, even though these kalim b'chlal are not kasher a bull, but they never absorbed a belua of isur. Amar Rabba bar Abba. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Ashi. Amar Shmuel. Kol hakelim shenashtam shem chametz bitzoinen nachamo. Kol hakela means even earthenware utensils. Mishtamesh by hand matzah. Matzah doesn't only mean matzah. Matzah means you can use it over Pesach. No problem. However, here's the exception. Chutz min beis so'oir, a sourdough holder. Now, because shechemutze kasha, Rashi says chemutze kasha means that you extend the amount of soaking the so'oir in the keli. It's about the time, like we mentioned, that if something, we call that kavish kemavushal, that if something cold is in a keli and there's moisture and it's there for more than 24 hours, so then it's like it was cooked. So that keli now absorbed the beliyas of chametz, and again, it's earthenware and it can never be kashered. Amar Avashi, I'll give you an example of beis charoises, a sharp condiment holder, a holder that holds charoises, or any other sharp item, like garlic or onions. Even though it was not there for a long amount of time, even though there was no heat, is kebeis oil shechemutze kashidami. That's the rules of beliyos. And Amarava hani agone de mechayza. In mechayza, they would have kneading troughs that they would feed the animals with, and they would and hoyel v'tadire lemelash bohu chamira. Since people use them to constantly knead those, so even though the kneading doesn't take that much time, but when I finished my job, you came with your job. They were like public areas where people constantly were kneading dough in there. So I said, and therefore umashahu, they would delay, they would prolong the chametz. So it's kibei so'oid shechemutze kasha. Again, chemutze kasha doesn't mean that it's very sharp. It means that since you extended the soaking for a long time. So here also these public kneading troughs, people are constantly kneading dough in there. They also absorb even though there's no heat and even though there's no sharpness. Pshita. No, since they're very wide, and therefore shalat b'hu avira, therefore there's a lot of airflow, and therefore volei balei. So kamash malan, I don't care that it's very wide if it's continuously being used for chametz. Even though there's no heat, even though there's no sharpness, but it's always in there. So then it's boileya the time of chametz, and therefore it may not be used during Pesach. I know we have a few more minutes, but it's Rosh Chodesh. We'll stop over here and we'll begin a new amazing sugya tomorrow with the help of Hashem.
Chazak u'baruch.
Thank you.